seal. And then they put the Empress of the Roman Empire on the wax. Now, everyone in the Roman Empire knew that that string couldn't hold it, but they knew if they broke it, all the power of Rome would come after them. Because this was officially sealed by edict of the emperor in the name of Pontius Pilate, or Pontius Pilatus. Now, in spite of all of this, in spite of the animosity of the Jewish leaders who tried everything and made sure they would keep that body in the tomb, in spite of the ambition of Pontius Pilate, in spite of the professionalism of the Roman Guard, in spite of the seal of the Roman Empire sealing that shut, 3 days later, that stone was rolled back in a miraculous manner. And when the soldiers had gotten over and cleaned themselves up a little bit from their fright, they went in and looked in there. They found that there was a strange sight there, but there was the body of Jesus was gone. And they fled in terror. And they fled to the Jewish religious leaders, Matthew 28 tells us, and the Jewish religious, some of them just deserted and ran for cover to hide. Some went to the Jewish religious leaders. And they told the leaders what happened, and the religious leaders said, look, we will intercede for you, we will save you, and they gave them a large sum of money. They said, you are to say that while we were asleep, the disciples came and stole the body. Okay? That was the only explanation that was ever given for over 4 centuries about the resurrection. Do you know that? It took unbelievers a long time to try to figure something else out. The only other explanation given was that he had been raised from the dead, and there were people who proclaimed they had seen him and went to the horrible death. Some were boiled in oil, some were crucified upside down, some were pulled apart by teams of horses, as was John Mark, the writer of the Gospel of Mark. In Alexandria, he was tied between 2 teams of horses and pulled in 2. He was told he could save his life if he would renounce that Jesus had been raised from the dead. He said, I will never renounce my Lord, and they pulled him in 2. All of them met, almost all of them met horrible deaths. Not one of them ever recanted on having seen Jesus alive. Not one. But this was the story that was circulated around. Now let's for a moment just imagine, I wished I had thought of this earlier. I thought of it while I was talking in the early service. I would have prepped somebody to be the commander of the Roman Guard to put him on trial up here. But let's just pretend. We got the commander of the Roman Guard sitting up here. And we're going to put him on trial about the events that have just happened. This body has disappeared. There are people in the streets saying that he's been raised from the dead. So we're going to find out the facts of the situation. Okay. You were the commander of the Roman Guard, is that correct? Yes, sir. Tell me what happened. Well, sir, we were asleep, and the disciples came and they stole the body. You were asleep. Am I to believe that you're admitting you were asleep on watch? You were the commander of the guard. Am I to believe that all 16 men were asleep? That's correct, sir. You're a centurion. What's the punishment for being asleep on watch? Execution, sir. Then why haven't you been executed? Well, because the Jewish religious leaders felt sorry for me, and they interceded for us. Oh, and why did they do that? From what I've seen of them, they're a rather ruthless bunch, and they have no mercy on anyone. So why would they intercede for you, since you failed on a watch that they established you on, and they committed the keeping of this body in the tomb, and you failed. Why would they intercede for you? Well, there were some extenuating circumstances. Tell us about those extenuating circumstances. This is a complete breach of Roman discipline. Well, we were just asleep. All right, 16 of you. You are a disciplined officer. You were distinguished in battle. I see your decorations. How can I believe that 16 of you could have slept all at once on watch, knowing your lives depended on it? I went out and I checked the grave. And I noticed that the rock that sealed the tomb is very large. I took the liberty of having some people roll it. It made enough noise to wake the dead as it rolled and grated against the rock face. Now, you mean to tell me that you and 16 men, knowing your life depended on keeping that guarded, slept through this whole thing? Yes, sir. You're a disgrace to the Roman army. And you're lying. If you want to prove your case, show me one of these disciples. And by the way, they were very cowardly. They were hiding during the crucifixion. How did they suddenly get so courageous as to come and steal the body in the face of battle-trained troops? Surely you killed at least one of them as they attempted to do this. Were any killed? No, sir. You're lying. The case doesn't hold water. Do you see? When you start examining these things according to the evidence of the courtroom and the procedure of courtroom, that testimony wouldn't have held water 2 minutes. And the problem is that there were other things that absolutely defied explanation. For instance, in John chapter 19, verses 38 through chapter 20, verse 8, there's a very unusual description of how Jesus was prepared for burial. It's a very important circumstantial evidence. 2 men who were part of the Jewish religious leadership had become secret believers in Jesus as the Messiah. Their names were Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. They came to Pilate once they saw Jesus was dead, and they asked for the body of Jesus, and Pilate said, he can't already be dead. You see, usually a person suffered on a cross for at least a day or two. But they had broken the legs of these people in order that they couldn't survive. They didn't break Jesus' leg. He had already died. But Pilate couldn't believe he was already dead. You see, he died by his own will. He said he would, and he did. So Pilate sent a centurion to check, and he found, yes, Jesus was already dead. So he gave the body to Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. And they were very wealthy men. It says they were, and we know they were, because they bought 100 pounds of myrrh and aloes and linen bandages that were used for preparing people for the dead according to Jewish custom. Now, myrrh and aloes is very expensive. It was in that day. And they used that to coat these 1-inch or so strips of linen. And that, they learned this from the Egyptians when they were there. They would wrap each limb with the linen bandages, the whole torso, like a mummy, each leg separately, each arm separately, then the torso and so forth. And they would wrap all the way up to the chin. They would not wrap the head. Then they had these beautiful death napkins that they would put over the face. They were made of pure linen, beautifully embroidered with religious sayings from Judaism, and they would place that over the face of the dead person. Well, John tells us very carefully how they prepared him according to the custom, only they were more elaborate than most because they used 100 pounds